The first time it happened, Marcus Webb assumed it was a mistake. He'd ordered a wireless charging pad on a Tuesday evening, nothing valuable, nothing that would derail his life. A small purchase he'd made while sitting in his apartment, mindlessly scrolling through product reviews at 10 p.m. The delivery confirmation arrived Wednesday morning, estimated arrival Friday afternoon. He marked it in his calendar, a mental note filed away among 1,000 other small tasks. Friday came and went, no package. Marcus checked the tracking number. The package had been delivered at 2:47 p.m. He was at work until 5. He'd driven home, walked up the sidewalk to his modest townhouse in the Pinewood Estates subdivision and found nothing. No box on the porch, no notice from the delivery driver, just the concrete step leading to his door, empty and mocking. He contacted the seller. They opened an investigation. 2 weeks later, after exchanges of screenshots and tracking data, they sent him a replacement. Marcus signed up for delivery notifications, promised himself he'd be more careful. The second time it happened, he was certain. A book he'd pre-ordered, The Psychology of Deception, arrived on a Tuesday. The notification pinged his phone at 1:15 p.m. He was at his office downtown, the kind of corporate job that paid well enough to buy a townhouse in a nice subdivision, but not well enough that he could afford to leave work whenever he wanted. He stared at that notification, watched the minute hand on the wall clock crawl forward, and made a decision. He'd leave early, just this once. He'd slip out at 3 p.m., grab the package, and give himself peace of mind. He was standing at a red light 3 blocks from home when his phone buzzed again. A photo, sent from his Ring doorbell camera. Motion detected. Marcus's breath caught. In the grainy video, a woman was already walking away from his porch, the book tucked under one arm, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sun. She wore workout clothes, yoga pants, a fitted tank top, the kind of outfit that suggested she'd just come from morning Pilates or whatever it was people in his neighborhood did when they weren't working 9-to-5 jobs. She moved with the kind of entitlement that comes from never being told no, her stride confident, her face turned slightly away from the camera, as if she already knew it was there and didn't care. Marcus watched her walk directly to the townhouse 3 doors down. His first instinct was to call the police. His second was rage. His third was confusion. Who the hell steals a book? But he'd already paid for it, and the seller wouldn't replace it a second time. He let it go. Then it happened again. And again. By the 4th incident, Marcus started to see the pattern. It wasn't random. She came every time a package arrived at his doorstep. Not always immediately. Sometimes she'd wait until late afternoon, watching his house until she was certain he wouldn't return, but she always came. She'd take photos first, looking at the label, checking the weight and size of the box, and then she'd take the ones that looked promising. The time she'd skipped a small padded envelope. He'd received the tracking notification for the replacement, and when he'd asked customer service what his original item was, they'd said he was lucky. It had been a scarf that he'd accidentally ordered in the wrong size. The time she'd left behind a bulky shipping box. It contained office supplies not worth the space in her car. She was selective, she was smart, she was doing this on purpose. By the 5th package, a new wallet from a leather goods maker he loved, Marcus was ready. He sat in his car, parked 2 blocks away, watching his house on his phone through the Ring app. He watched her arrive at 2 p.m. on a Thursday. He watched her lift the box, check the label, study the weight. He watched her open the small side gate to his porch, unlocked, always unlocked, never thinking he needed to lock it in a nice neighborhood, and examine the package one more time before tucking it under her arm. This time, he started his car. He didn't drive toward home. Instead, he pulled out slowly and followed her. 2 townhouses down, 3, 4, 5th house on the left, the corner lot with the immaculate landscaping, the white picket fence, the kind of place that screamed, "I voted yes on the HOA amendment to ban yard signs." The woman pulled into the driveway and disappeared into the house. Marcus sat in his car for 5 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel. His face was hot. His heart was hammering against his ribs. She was his neighbor, an actual neighbor, someone he might have passed at the mailbox or seen at the community pool. Someone who lived 300 feet away from him and had decided that anything delivered to his house was fair game. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the neighborhood Facebook page, the one where people complained about dog walkers not picking up poop and debated the acceptable colors for front doors. He found her easily. Patricia Henderson, 47, listed as HOA compliance officer in her bio. Of course she was. Marcus went home, parked his car, and called the police non-emergency line. The officer who arrived 40 minutes later was polite but unhelpful. No witnesses except a doorbell camera. Nothing he could definitively prove. The deliveries were still arriving at his address, which meant they were technically his property when stolen, but without catching her in the act. "Without catching her, you can't do anything," Marcus said flatly. "I'm afraid not," the officer agreed. "You could file a report for the record, maybe take extra precautions, have packages held at the depot, or use a P.O. box." It was not the answer Marcus wanted to hear. That night, he sat in his apartment and made a decision. He wasn't going to call the police again. He wasn't going to report her to the HOA board. She was on the board. He wasn't going to confront her because confrontation required proof, and his proof was a grainy video of a neighbor who could claim she was just returning a package that was delivered to the wrong address. Instead, he was going to do something smarter. Marcus pulled up his laptop and navigated to a website he'd bookmarked months ago, during a period when he'd become mildly obsessed with understanding human behavior, supply chain vulnerabilities, and the psychology of theft. It was a hobby, nothing more, the kind of digital rabbit hole that curious people fell down all the time. He spent the next hour browsing novelty websites, gag gift sites, and specialty retailers. He cross-referenced his findings with shipping dimensions and weights. He created a fake order on a completely separate account he'd set up specifically for this purpose, an account with no connection to his real identity, paid for with a prepaid gift card. He was going to catch her, but not the way the police might expect. He was going to give her exactly what she deserved. By Friday, the order was placed. Estimated delivery next Thursday afternoon. The box would be approximately the same size as the wallet box. The weight would be similar enough that someone merely lifting it wouldn't notice the difference. And the contents? Well, the contents would be a surprise. Marcus had never felt like this before. Not righteous exactly, because righteousness implied morality, and what he was doing existed in some gray area that he wasn't fully prepared to examine. But he felt something like satisfaction, like control returning to him after weeks of violation. Marcus found himself checking his phone obsessively, tracking the package through each distribution center, each scanning point, each incremental progress toward his house. He'd never been this focused on a shipment before. Every status update felt like a small victory. Every mile traveled was 1 mile closer to resolution. Tuesday afternoon, he got a text from an unknown number. His heart jumped, but it was just a routine notification from his bank, fraud alert for the unusual purchase. He'd forgotten that buying items on a masked account might trigger security protocols. He cleared it quickly, a precaution to keep his real identity separate from the order. The order. That's what he was calling it now in his mind. The order. Like it was something meaningful, something planned, something that mattered. He'd never done anything like this before. In his past, a past that suddenly felt distant and naive, Marcus had been the kind of person who believed in systems. Institutions, the police, the legal system. The HOA existed for reasons, supposedly, to maintain property values, to ensure everyone played by the same rules. It had seemed reasonable once when he'd first moved to Pinewood Estates. A nice neighborhood, clean, organized, safe. But safety only worked if everyone followed the rules. And Patricia Henderson had made it clear that she didn't think the rules applied to her. Wednesday evening, the package was out for delivery. Marcus checked the tracking obsessively throughout the day, and by 2 p.m. it showed as on vehicle for delivery. He left work early again, the same excuse as before, a personal emergency, a family matter, and drove home with a controlled pulse and careful breathing. He parked in his garage and closed the door, eliminating any excuse she might make about him being home. Then he waited in the living room, watching the camera feed on his phone. The delivery truck arrived at 2:47 p.m. The driver, a man in a blue uniform, efficient and impersonal, walked up to his porch and left the box. Standard procedure. He took a photo, scanned his device, and left. Marcus watched the box sit on his porch for 8 minutes. Nothing. His hand began to sweat on his phone screen. Then at 2:55 p.m., motion detection triggered. She was coming down the sidewalk in her "I just came from the gym" outfit. Gray leggings, a pink sports bra, her blonde hair in a high, tight ponytail that made her face look stretched and severe. She walked with the same confidence as always, the same entitlement, the same absolute certainty that whatever she wanted would be hers to take. She didn't even look around, didn't scan the street for witnesses. She simply walked to his porch, checked the label, and picked up the box. Marcus watched her lift it, watched her evaluate its weight, watched her smile, an actual satisfied smile, before she tucked it under her arm and walked back toward her house. He waited 3 minutes to make sure she was inside, then he texted a message to the burner phone, the one connected to that account. A single word, delivered. Then he deleted the message, cleared the cache, and removed the SIM card from the burner phone. She was going to open it Thursday morning. Marcus was certain of this because he'd seen her pattern. Packages arrived Thursday afternoon or Friday morning, timing that made sense given her personal shopping habits. She always opened them quickly, used them, or logged their contents somewhere. He deduced this from the way her theft was so selective, so calculated. She wasn't a hoarder. She was cataloging. But he didn't expect her to come to his house on Friday morning, standing at his door at 9 a.m., her face the color of spoiled milk. Marcus had been drinking coffee when the doorbell rang. The sound sent a jolt through him, not of fear, but of something deeper, recognition that this was actually happening. That he'd crossed a line and someone was standing on the other side of it, demanding accountability. He looked at the camera feed before opening the door. Patricia Henderson, standing on his porch. No workout clothes this time. She wore jeans and a silk blouse, her hair professionally curled, her makeup perfect. She looked like someone had called her to a meeting she didn't want to attend. She looked furious. Marcus took a breath, arranged his face into an expression of mild confusion, and opened the door. "Can I help you?" he asked. He had to use effort to keep his voice neutral, uncertain, not the voice of someone who'd been planning this for 2 weeks. "We need to talk," Patricia said. Her voice was sharp, clipped. She'd practiced this opening, Marcus could tell. She'd psyched herself up for it. He kept the door only partially open, let her feel excluded. "I think you know." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He let confusion play across his face. "I'm sorry, but I'm not sure I do. Can you refresh my memory?" Patricia's jaw clenched. "Your package, the one that was delivered yesterday." "I haven't received any packages yesterday," Marcus said, which was technically true. The package he'd sent, the one she'd stolen, had been delivered to his porch, which meant it was his property only legally speaking, only in the way that all things that arrive at someone's address become their property. But the real contents, those had been meant for her. "Don't play stupid," Patricia hissed. "The box, the one from the online retailer." "Oh," Marcus said, letting understanding dawn on his face. "You mean the box that was delivered to my house and taken from my porch? You know about that." Patricia's face flushed red. "I don't appreciate your tone." "I'm not sure I appreciate someone breaking into my property," Marcus countered. His voice was calm, reasonable. It was the voice of someone who'd been wronged and was simply stating facts. "I didn't break in, the box was on my porch, which means it was my property. Once you took it without my permission, that became theft. Petty theft, but theft nonetheless." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "We both know what's happening here. This was a test, wasn't it? You knew someone was." She couldn't even say it, couldn't say, "I've been stealing your packages." So she was leaving it vague, leaving herself an out, just in case this conversation was being recorded. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said. He started to close the door. "Wait," Patricia put her hand against it. "We need to discuss what was in that box." And there it was, the crack in her composure. Whatever he'd ordered, whatever she'd actually opened and found, it wasn't sitting well with her. Marcus opened the door a few inches wider, enough to see her eyes, enough to see the faint edge of panic she was trying to hide. "What about what was in the box?" he asked. Patricia took a moment. In that moment, Marcus could see her calculating, trying to figure out what he knew, what he'd done, what he'd intended. Her hand dropped from the door frame. "That box contains something," she said carefully, "that I need to explain." "I'm listening." But she wasn't going to explain. Not here. Not at his door, where neighbors might walk by, where her carefully constructed image of respectability might be compromised by the fact that she was standing at another resident's house at 9 a.m. on a Friday morning, negotiating with him about packages. "We should talk somewhere private," Patricia said finally. "Not here, not on the street." Marcus tilted his head. "Are you asking me to come to your house, Patricia, so we can discuss how you've been stealing my packages?" She flinched at the direct statement. "I haven't been stealing." "You're not going to deny it now?" Marcus interrupted. "Not after coming here demanding to discuss what's in a box that was delivered to my house and taken from my porch. A porch that you can clearly see as my property, which means you knew what you were doing was wrong, which means you knew it was theft." Patricia's face had gone very pale. "If you call the police," she said quietly, "I will make sure that everyone in this neighborhood knows about the inappropriate interaction you attempted with that new girl at the community center. The one who works at the—" Marcus felt something hot and terrible spike through his chest. "You're going to blackmail me." "I'm going to protect myself," Patricia said, but her voice wavered. She didn't have anything. Or if she did, it wasn't something she was confident enough to actually follow through on. It was a Hail Mary, a desperate gamble from someone who'd realized she was outmatched. "Go home, Patricia," Marcus said, and this time his voice was quiet, dangerous in a way he didn't know he was capable of being. "Open the box, look at what's inside, and then think very carefully about whether you want to continue this conversation." "What's in the box?" she demanded, but her voice had gone up an octave. She knew something was wrong. She could feel it. "Consider it a gift," Marcus said, "for all the packages you've taken over the last few weeks." He closed the door in her face. Through the peephole, he watched her stand there for another 30 seconds, her hand raised as if she might knock again, her face working through a series of emotions: rage, fear, confusion, calculation. Then she turned and walked back toward her house. Marcus stood in his doorway, heart hammering, hands shaking, and realized that what he felt wasn't exactly triumph. It was something darker than that, something more complicated. He'd set a trap, and she'd walked directly into it, and now the real consequences were beginning to unfold, and he couldn't stop them even if he wanted to. 4 weeks of hormone replacement therapy medications. Not the expensive kind, not what a real doctor would prescribe. He'd ordered them from an overseas pharmaceutical site, the kind of place that asks no questions and sends packages in unmarked boxes. A full month's supply of estrogen and progesterone, enough to cause noticeable physical effects if taken without medical supervision. Enough to cause confusion and panic in someone who had no idea why they were receiving them. It was, Marcus had told himself, poetic justice. It was a statement about violation. It was about her stealing something personal, his mail, his privacy, his sense of safety in his own home, and him stealing something personal back. The difference, he'd reasoned, was that his theft was intentional, purposeful, a message delivered via pharmacy. But sitting in his apartment on Friday morning, watching Patricia through the window as she hurried back toward her house, he felt the first real stirring of doubt. He'd never actually wanted to hurt anyone. He'd wanted to scare her, to make her understand what it felt like to have someone violate your space, to take something that didn't belong to them. But hormonal medications weren't a scare tactic. They were a violation of an entirely different magnitude. Marcus pushed the thought away. The notification came through at 2 p.m. A post on the neighborhood Facebook page, not directly from Patricia, but from someone. A new post in the safety alerts section, which Patricia probably moderated, given her role as HOA compliance officer. Alert, be careful of suspicious packages. There have been reports of medications sent to residents' addresses that are not their prescriptions. If you receive any unexpected pharmaceutical items, do not open. Contact local authorities immediately. This is being investigated as a potential mail fraud case. Residents should ensure they are ordering items directly to their own accounts and checking tracking information. It was brilliant, actually. Diabolical. Patricia had turned her own theft into a neighborhood-wide alert, framing the packages as a criminal problem rather than her own kleptomaniac behavior. She was covering her tracks while simultaneously destroying his. The second notification came at 3 p.m., a knock on his door. This time, when Marcus checked the camera, his stomach dropped. It wasn't Patricia, it was 2 police officers. He let them in. He had nothing else to do. He couldn't exactly claim he didn't know why they were here, because that would be an obvious lie, and the moment they told him their reason for coming, he'd have to make a split-second decision about what to tell them. "Mr. Webb," the first officer said. Her name tag read O'Brien, and she had the kind of face that suggested she'd seen a lot of suburban drama and was tired of it. "We're here regarding some mail fraud accusations that have been reported." "Mail fraud," Marcus's voice came out higher than he intended. "We've received a report that someone at this address has been receiving and potentially distributing unauthorized pharmaceutical medications to neighborhood residents. Are you aware of any packages like that arriving here? Marcus's mouth was very dry. No, he said, absolutely not. Have you ordered any medications recently? Anything that might have been delivered here? The lie came easily. No, I don't order prescription medications online. I see my doctor, she prescribes what I need, and I use my local pharmacy. O'Brien studied him. We're going to need to check your receipt history, your email accounts, any online orders you've placed in the past month. Of course, Marcus heard himself say, whatever you need. But he was already thinking 10 steps ahead. He'd used a completely separate account. A Gmail address he'd created specifically for the order, accessed via a VPN, paid for with a prepaid card he'd purchased at Target with cash. There was no obvious connection to him. Or at least there shouldn't be. This is a serious matter, Mr. Webb, O'Brien continued. If someone has your address compromised or if someone has taken your identity. I understand, Marcus interrupted, and I want to help however I can. They took his information. They asked him to check his accounts while they were there to make sure nothing suspicious had occurred. They assured him that if nothing turned up, they'd be on their way. They asked if he had any enemies in the neighborhood, anyone who might have a grudge. No, Marcus said, and wondered if that was technically true. Everyone here is pleasant enough. O'Brien exchanged a glance with her partner. We're aware that the HOA compliance officer is the one who reported this. Patricia Henderson. Have you had any issues with her? Marcus's heart rate spiked. This was it. This was the moment where he could deflect, blame her, tell them about his stolen packages, create a counter-narrative where he was the victim and she was the villain who'd made this accusation against him out of spite. But if he did that, if he admitted that he knew her, knew about her behavior, it would take about 5 minutes for them to pull the security camera footage and see her stealing his packages. And then they'd wonder what his motive was for framing her with hormone medications. I don't know her personally, Marcus said carefully. I've seen her around the neighborhood, but we've never really interacted. It was technically true. They'd never interacted before this morning, and this morning had lasted all of 90 seconds. The officers finished their questioning 20 minutes later. They didn't find anything incriminating on his laptop. Because the VPN history had been cleared, the email account would show no obvious connection to him, and the prepaid card couldn't be traced back to his identity. They assured him they'd follow up if they found anything suspicious and thanked him for his cooperation. After they left, Marcus sat on his couch and felt something shift inside him. He'd done this, not just ordered the medications as a prank or a scare tactic, though that had been his intention. He'd actually created a criminal investigation. He'd sent fraudulent pharmaceutical medications to his own address and then passed them to someone else, and now the police were investigating. He was technically guilty of mail fraud, of distributing controlled substances without a prescription, of potentially endangering someone's health. The justification that she'd stolen from him, that she deserved it, felt smaller now, more hollow. Marcus pulled up the neighborhood Facebook page and scrolled through the comments on Patricia's safety alert post. This is so scary. I'm going to start having everything held at the depot. Why would someone send medications? This seems targeted. Does anyone know who's behind this? We need better security in this neighborhood. This is exactly why we need the new camera initiative Patricia proposed. And there it was. Patricia was going to use this. Use his trap against him, use it to push through whatever authoritarian nightmare she'd been planning for the HOA. Better cameras, more monitoring, more control. Marcus realized with a sinking feeling that he'd miscalculated. He'd thought he was setting a trap for Patricia. But she'd turned it around, weaponized it, and now it was a trap for the entire neighborhood. The third notification came at 6 p.m. Another Facebook post, this one from Patricia herself. As your HOA compliance officer, I want to assure everyone that we are taking these safety concerns very seriously. I have personally been working with local law enforcement to investigate the source of this criminal activity. We will be implementing new protocols, including the installation of security cameras at all community entrances and common areas. Additionally, all package deliveries should be rerouted to a central receiving area that I will be monitoring personally to ensure the safety and security of our residents. Vote on these measures will take place at the next HOA meeting. Your safety is my priority. Marcus read it 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. She'd turned herself into the hero of the story. He'd given her the perfect opportunity to consolidate power, to implement the kind of surveillance and control that she'd probably been dreaming about for years. And she'd taken it and run with it. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Thanks for the ammunition. Consider our debt settled." Then the number stopped responding. It was from Patricia, obviously, sent from a burner phone, the kind of phone that would be impossible to trace. She was telling him that she knew exactly what he'd done and that she didn't care, because his trap had turned into her victory and now they were even. Marcus sat in the darkness of his apartment and realized that he'd lost. Not to Patricia, not exactly, but to something larger, to the way that systems worked, to the way that power flowed to the people who were willing to exploit it most ruthlessly. He'd tried to be clever, and all he'd done was hand her the tools to become more powerful. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks out. He wondered if he should try to stop her, wondered what he could possibly say, wondered if anything he did at this point would make it better or only make it worse. He spent Saturday afternoon researching how to delete digital footprints, how to clear a browser history thoroughly enough that forensic experts couldn't recover it, how to factory reset a phone and destroy a hard drive. He read forums about VPN security and the supposed untraceability of cryptocurrency transactions. He went down a rabbit hole of paranoia that lasted until midnight, when he finally closed his laptop and realized that the more he tried to hide, the more suspicious he looked. The police would either find evidence of his involvement or they wouldn't. Obsessing over it now wouldn't change that. And besides, the real problem wasn't the police. The police probably weren't even going to investigate very hard. This was suburban mail fraud, not terrorism. They'd look for obvious suspects, disgruntled postal workers, rival business owners, personal enemies. They wouldn't necessarily think to subpoena his entire internet history for a crime that had barely risen to the level of a misdemeanor. The real problem was Patricia. Marcus spent Sunday morning at the community center, something he'd never done before. He paid the day-use fee and went to the gym, and while he was on the treadmill, he listened to the conversations around him. 2 women in yoga pants were discussing the pharmacy incident. "It's clearly someone with a grudge," the first one said, "targeting the neighborhood." "Or someone mentally unstable," the second one replied. "Just sending random medications, it's psychotic." "Patricia's handling it well, though. I'm voting yes on the security measures. Better safe than sorry." Marcus ran faster, trying to burn off the anxiety and the anger and the strange sense of powerlessness that was settling over him like a heavy fog. That evening, he did something he probably shouldn't have done. He created another anonymous email account, and he sent a message to the neighborhood listserv. He didn't send it directly. That would leave a trace. But he created it in a way that bounced through VPNs and anonymous email services, a message that appeared to come from a concerned resident. Has anyone else noticed that Patricia Henderson's recent push for increased security came right after the medication incident? Has anyone considered that this is convenient timing for her to implement surveillance that benefits her position as HOA compliance officer? I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but I've noticed that Patricia has been very aggressive about expanding her authority. Just something to think about before you vote. He hit send and watched it disappear into the internet, a seed planted that might grow or might not. He checked the Facebook group obsessively over the next week, watching the responses. Some people defended Patricia, some people got quiet, a few people started asking questions. But not enough, not nearly enough. The HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7 p.m. in the community center's main conference room. Marcus didn't plan to go. He wasn't a member of the HOA board, and attendance was technically open to residents, but showing up would be drawing attention to himself. The police investigation was still technically ongoing, and he had no idea if his name had come up in any of their interviews with Patricia. He spent Thursday afternoon trying not to think about it. He went to work. He made it through back-to-back meetings without losing his composure. He even managed to eat a sandwich for lunch. At 6:45 p.m., he found himself in his car anyway, driving toward the community center. He parked in the back lot, the one that wasn't visible from the main entrance. He figured if the meeting got uncomfortable or if he saw something that alarmed him, he could slip back out before anyone noticed he'd been there. The conference room was packed. At least 40 residents had shown up, which meant they cared about the security proposal, or they cared about whatever drama was happening, or both. Marcus took a seat in the back row, inconspicuous, and waited. Patricia was wearing a navy blazer and a white silk blouse. Professional, authoritative. She looked like someone who'd been chosen to run for office and was just getting started. The board president, a man named David Chen who worked in finance and had never had a strong opinion about anything in the 3 years Marcus had lived there, opened the meeting with the usual procedural items. Approval of previous minutes, treasurer's report, old business. Then they got to new business. As many of you are aware, Patricia began, standing at the front of the room with a presentation remote in her hand. We've experienced a concerning incident in our community over the past 2 weeks. Fraudulent pharmaceutical medications have been delivered to one of our residences, creating a safety risk for our entire neighborhood. She clicked to the first slide, a map of the community with a red marker on Marcus's house. His stomach twisted. While the police are still investigating the source of these medications, Patricia continued, it's become clear to me that we have a vulnerability in our current security infrastructure. We don't know who this person is. We don't know their motivation, and we don't have adequate surveillance to identify them. She clicked to the next slide, cost estimates for security cameras. I'm proposing that we install cameras at 4 key locations: the community entrance, the main pool area, the dog park, and the community center. Additionally, I'm proposing that all package deliveries be consolidated at a central receiving area, which I would be responsible for managing. This would ensure that no resident would have to worry about their deliveries being compromised. It was masterful, actually. She'd taken the thing that made her look bad, the fact that packages were being stolen from porches, and turned it into a problem that only she could solve. Because everyone in the room was now thinking about the fact that she knew about the thefts before the police even arrived. And that was going to be filed away in the back of their minds, the knowledge that Patricia had been the one to report the fraud, Patricia had been the one to alert them to the danger. Which meant Patricia had known something was wrong. Which meant Patricia had been paying very close attention to the neighborhood. Which meant Patricia was the kind of person you wanted handling your security. Marcus watched the residents in the audience nodding along. A few were taking notes. One woman was actually smiling. Then a hand went up in the middle of the room. A woman Marcus didn't recognize. Yes, Patricia acknowledged her. I have a question, the woman said. Her name tag identified her as Susan Rodriguez, Unit 7. How did you know there was a security problem before the police arrived? The Facebook post about the medications came before the official police report, right? Patricia didn't miss a beat. I noticed a package delivery to one of our residences, and it looked suspicious. I called the police non-emergency line and reported it. They came and investigated, and that's how I found out about the broader issue. It was a lie, but it was a plausible lie. And Susan Rodriguez might have pushed further, except that David Chen interrupted. I think what Patricia is proposing is reasonable, he said. We've had security concerns for a while now. This is just the impetus we needed to address them. Vote came next. 42 residents present. A majority required 22 votes. For the camera installation, the vote was 31 in favor. For the package consolidation, it was 28 in favor. Patricia had won. Not just the vote, but the narrative. The story about who she was, what she was doing, what her role was in this community. She'd transformed herself from a package thief into a security-conscious administrator who cared deeply about the well-being of her neighbors. Marcus sat in his chair and realized that she'd been smarter than him all along. Not just smarter about covering her tracks, but smarter about understanding how people thought, how they processed information, how a confident person with a presentation and a plan could convince an entire community that her vision was not just reasonable but necessary. He was still sitting there, processing this, when she saw him. Patricia was walking toward the exit with a group of residents when her eyes locked on his across the room. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, and she inclined her head slightly. It was the gesture of someone acknowledging a worthy opponent. The thing about traps is that once you've set one, you spend the rest of your life checking to see if it's been sprung. Marcus began receiving notifications from law enforcement 3 weeks later. The investigation into the pharmaceutical fraud had come to a conclusion. but not the one he'd been expecting. They'd traced the medications back to the overseas pharmacy, but the purchasing account had been created using a combination of anonymization tools that made it nearly impossible to tie to a specific person without a warrant. The detective who called him, a man named Rodriguez, no relation to the woman from the HOA meeting, seemed almost embarrassed. "We're going to be closing this case," he said. "Without more specific leads, we can't justify continuing the investigation. It's possible this was someone with access to your address or someone who wanted to cause trouble in the neighborhood, but we're not going to be able to identify them." "What about the packages?" Marcus asked. "The ones that were stolen from my porch before the medications." There was a pause. "I'm not aware of any previous theft reports from your address, Mr. Webb." Of course there weren't. Marcus had never filed a police report. He'd called the non-emergency line once and spoken to an officer, but that was years ago. Well, weeks ago, but it felt like years. He'd accepted the officer's advice about using a P.O. box and moved on. There was no official record. "Never mind," Marcus said. "Thank you for the update." He hung up the phone and stood in his apartment, looking out at the street below. Patricia had gotten away with it. The theft, the manipulation, the way she'd used his own trap against him to consolidate power. And now the police had closed their investigation, which meant the medications case would fade from people's minds. It would become part of the neighborhood folklore, the strange incident that had happened that one time, the motivation behind the security cameras that were now going up around the community. In a month, no one would remember who had received the medications. In 2 months, no one would think about the scandal at all. But the cameras would still be there, and Patricia would still be managing the package delivery system. And she would still be the HOA compliance officer, now with significantly more authority and significantly more resources. Marcus had intended to teach her a lesson about theft and boundaries. Instead, he'd given her a promotion. He spent the next week in a state of suspended anxiety, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the police to figure it out, for Patricia to call him and demand money or favors or something, but nothing came. The case remained closed. The cameras went up on the appointed date, installed by a private security company that Patricia had somehow had the budget to hire. And then, 2 weeks after the HOA meeting, Marcus received a notice on his door. It was a violation notice, printed on official HOA letterhead, signed by Patricia Henderson, compliance officer. The violation: unauthorized use of electrical outlets on common property. He had no idea what it meant. He didn't have any electrical outlets on common property. He didn't use the community pool or the dog park or the exercise room in the community center. He brought the notice to the community center office, where a woman named Linda, who handled administrative matters, seemed embarrassed to see him. "I think there might be a mistake," Marcus said, showing her the notice. Linda looked at it and her face went tight. "Let me talk to Patricia," she said. "I don't think this is right." 20 minutes later, Patricia appeared. "Mr. Webb," she said, her voice sweet as poison. "I'm glad you came in. Let me explain the violation." "There is no violation," Marcus said quietly. "Actually, there is. You see, I've been reviewing the security camera footage from the community center's parking lot, and it appears that on 3 separate occasions in the past month, you've parked in a space that requires a community center membership to use. Since you don't have an active membership, you've been in violation of the parking regulations." Marcus stared at her. "I came to the community center once for a day pass. I used a day pass parking space." "According to our records, you weren't." Patricia produced a printed photograph. It was time-stamped and showed his car in what was clearly a member-only space. "This was from a week ago, and here," she produced another photo, "from 2 weeks ago, and here from yesterday." "I wasn't here yesterday," Marcus said flatly. Patricia smiled. "That's what you say, but the cameras don't lie, Mr. Webb, and the violation stands. The fine is $250 due within 30 days. If it's not paid, it will be escalated to a lien against your property." Marcus understood in that moment exactly what was happening. She was telling him that she could create whatever story she wanted. She had the cameras now. She had the footage. She had the authority. And if he tried to fight it, if he tried to prove that the footage was fabricated or that he hadn't been there, she would tie him up in HOA procedures and bureaucratic complications for months. This was her message. This was her way of saying, "I know what you did. and I can do far worse than you ever dreamed of." "Is there anything else?" Patricia asked, her voice dripping with false politeness. "No," Marcus said. He took the violation notice and left. He paid the fine, not because he believed he owed it, but because the cost of fighting it would be far higher than the cost of the fine itself. That was how she designed the system. Small enough violations that people would just pay them rather than argue. Stacked enough together that they would eventually become significant. And all of it technically legal, technically within her authority as an officer of the HOA. That night, Marcus packed a box with his most valuable possessions. Not to leave, not yet, but just to have them ready, just in case he needed to get out quickly. He realized, with a creeping sense of horror, that Patricia had turned the tables completely. He tried to expose her as a thief, and she turned herself into a vigilant protector. He tried to frighten her with the medications, and she'd used the incident to expand her power. And now, when he tried to simply exist in his own neighborhood, she was using her new authority to make his life infinitely more complicated. He had started this thinking he was the one with control, but control had always been hers. She'd just been waiting for him to make a move so she could demonstrate exactly how the system worked and how it worked in her favor. The fourth violation notice came 3 days later. Improper landscaping in a front garden area. Marcus's landscaping was identical to everyone else's. The fifth violation came a week after that. Something about the color of his front door being one shade too dark. By the eighth violation, Marcus understood that she could do this forever. She could generate notices based on footage that might or might not exist. She could tie him up in administrative hell. She could make his life in Pinewood Estates so unbearable that he would eventually have no choice but to leave. And it would all be legal. He started researching real estate agents. But before he could take any action, before he could list his townhouse and acknowledge defeat, something unexpected happened. A new post appeared on the neighborhood Facebook page. It was from a resident named James Park from Unit 12. "I'm starting to notice a pattern with the violation notices. I received one last week for something that clearly doesn't apply to my property. I mentioned it to my neighbor, and she said she got one too, for something that doesn't make sense. Has anyone else been receiving questionable violation notices from Patricia Henderson? I'm starting to wonder if we should request an audit of the HOA's records." The post had 47 comments within the hour. "I got one, for a parked car, but it was clearly in my space." "Me too, mine was about recyclables. I wasn't even home when it was supposedly delivered." "This is ridiculous. We need to vote her out." "She's clearly abusing her power. We should contact a lawyer." Marcus read the thread 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. Patricia hadn't just picked on him. She'd been picking on everyone, and he hadn't been the only one to notice. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. And when Marcus walked into the conference room, he could feel the energy in the room. The anger, the frustration, the understanding that something had gone wrong. Patricia sat at the front table with David Chen and 2 other board members, and for the first time since this had all started, she looked worried. The meeting was contentious from the start. Resident after resident stood up and complained about violation notices that didn't make sense, violations that had been issued when they weren't even home, violations that seemed to target specific residents while ignoring similar issues with other properties. Patricia tried to explain that the violation system was automated, that the cameras were providing accurate information, that residents were misunderstanding the regulations. But her voice had lost its certainty. She was defensive now, scrambling. "I move that we suspend Patricia Henderson from her position as HOA compliance officer, pending an independent audit of her violation records," James Park announced. The motion passed 34-8. Patricia stood up. Her face had gone very pale and her hands were shaking. "This is a witch hunt," she said. "I've been trying to keep this community safe and now you're all turning on me." "You've been abusing your authority," another resident interrupted, "and we're done with it." Patricia grabbed her purse and walked out of the meeting. She didn't run, didn't seem panicked, but Marcus could see the damage. The certainty had been broken. The illusion of invulnerability had been shattered. He realized, watching her leave, that she'd made a mistake, a crucial, fundamental error. She'd become too comfortable with her power. She'd started to believe that the system would protect her no matter what, that residents wouldn't actually band together against her. Not because Patricia had forced him out, but because he wanted to leave. Pinewood Estates no longer felt like a safe place to live. It felt like a neighborhood where everyone was watching everyone else, where systems could be weaponized by the people who controlled them, where ordinary conflicts escalated into neighborhood warfare. The HOA held a formal investigation into Patricia's conduct. The results were sent to all residents in a sealed packet. Marcus read the summary. Patricia had issued 147 violation notices over an 8-month period, with documentation that showed most of them were based on fabricated or exaggerated claims. She'd essentially created a system of intimidation and control. She was banned from holding any HOA position for the next 5 years. Marcus heard through the neighborhood gossip chain that she'd hired a lawyer, that she was considering pressing harassment charges against James Park and some of the other residents who'd called for her removal. But the lawyer had apparently advised against it. Too many witnesses, too much documentation, too clear a pattern of abuse. So Patricia was simply living in her corner house, the one with the immaculate landscaping and the white picket fence. The security cameras that she'd fought so hard to install were still there, maintained by the community. And every time one of them captured something, it was reviewed by a resident committee, not by Patricia alone. On his last day in Pinewood Estates, Marcus did something he probably shouldn't have done. He walked 3 houses down and knocked on Patricia's door. She opened it wearing an expression of pure hatred, but when she saw who it was, something shifted in her face. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. "I'm leaving," Marcus told her. "Good," Patricia said. "You should have left weeks ago." "You know what I realized?" Marcus continued. "We're not that different. We both tried to manipulate the system. We both thought we were smarter than everyone else, and we both ended up destroying ourselves in the process." Patricia started to close the door. "Wait," Marcus said. "Did you ever open the box, the one with the medications?" Patricia's hand stilled on the doorknob. "Not at first," she admitted finally. "I thought it was something you'd ordered for yourself and forgotten about. I realized what it was about 5 minutes after I got home, when I opened it and saw the labels, the pharmacy name, the fact that they were hormones." "I was trying to scare you," Marcus said quietly. "You did," Patricia replied, "but not in the way you intended. You scared me because I realized I'd already opened it, that I'd already violated something more significant than just your privacy, that I'd stolen something that could have hurt me. And instead of facing that, instead of being honest about what I'd done, I used my authority to turn it into a problem I could manage." It was the most honest conversation Marcus had ever had with her. "I'm sorry," he said. "So am I," Patricia replied, "but sorry doesn't fix anything." She closed the door. Marcus walked back to his car, loaded the last box, and drove out of Pinewood Estates for the last time. In his rearview mirror, the neighborhood looked peaceful. The houses all in their proper order, the lawns all perfectly maintained, the system functioning exactly as it was designed to. But underneath that order, Marcus knew, there was something darker, a knowledge that the system could be weaponized, that rules could be twisted, that authority could be abused by anyone willing to be ruthless enough. He drove toward his new apartment in the city and tried not to think about what would happen to Patricia, or what would happen to Pinewood Estates, or what he'd learned about himself in the process of trying to set a trap for someone else. The truth was more complicated than either of them wanted to admit. Stealing the packages had been wrong. Sending the medications had been wrong. But Patricia's attempt to use her authority to destroy him had also been wrong. And his original attempt to frame her with an anonymous post had been wrong. Everyone had been wrong, and they'd all paid the price. As Marcus merged onto the highway, heading away from the suburb and toward whatever came next, he thought about the saying that revenge is a dish best served cold. But he'd learned something different. Revenge was a dish that poisoned everyone at the table. It didn't matter who served it first or who served it with more style. In the end, they all ended up sick.